There is a terrible darkness descending upon the galaxy, and we shall not see it ended in our lifetimes.
The Necrons are a mysterious xenospecies of humanoid robotic skeletal warriors that have lain dormant in their stasis tombs for more than 60 million Terran years, though they have begun to awaken at last. They are the soulless creations, former servants and now the captors of the ancient Khitan, the terrible star gods of Aldari myth. The Necrons are ancient beyond reckoning, predating even the birth of the Aldari. At long last, however, they are beginning to awaken from their tomb worlds, for the galaxy is ripe for conquest and the restoration of the Necron Empire since the disappearance of the Old Ones more than 60 million standard years ago. The Necrons are a completely robotic humanoid species whose technological prowess is probably unmatched by any of the other intelligent species of the galaxy. Yet out of a desire for vengeance against the more fortunate, long-lived ancient Xenos people called the Old Ones, and the trickery of the godlike intelligences known as the Khitan, the Necrons shed their original organic forms and lost all forms of compassion and empathy. They have become instead ruthless, undying killing machines who are determined to exert their mastery over the galaxy once more. Across the galaxy, this ancient and terrible species is stirring back to life. Entombed in stasis crypts for millions of Terran years, they have slumbered through the eons, waiting for the galaxy to heal from the wounds of a long and bloody war. Now, after 60 million standard years of dormancy, a great purpose begins. On desolate worlds thought long bereft of all life, ancient machineries wake into grim purpose, commencing the slow process of revivification that will see those entombed within freed to stride across the stars once again. The unstoppable, undying Necron Legions are rising. Let the galaxy beware. All Necrons, from the lowliest of warriors to the most regal of lords, are driven by one ultimate goal: to restore their ancient ruling dynasties to glory and to bring the galaxy under their rule once more, as it was in ancient days. Such was the edict long ago encoded into the Necrons' minds, and it is a command so fundamental to their being that it cannot be denied. Yet it is no small task, for the Necrons are awakening from their tomb worlds to find the galaxy of the 41st millennium as recorded by the imperial calendar much changed. Many tomb worlds are no more, destroyed by cosmic disaster or alien invasion. Others are damaged, their entombed legions afflicted by slow madness or worn to dust by entropy's irresistible onset. Degenerate alien species squat amongst the ruins of those Necron tomb worlds that remain, little aware of the greatness they defile with their upstart presence. Yet there is no salvation to be found in such ignorance. The undying have come to reclaim their lands, and the living shall be swept aside. Yet if billions of Necrons have been destroyed by the passage of eternity, countless billions more remain to see their dominion reborn. They are not creatures of flesh and blood, these Necrons, but android warriors whose immortal forms are forged from living metal. As such, they are almost impervious to destruction, and their mechanical bodies are swift to heal even the gravest wounds. Given time, severed limbs reattach, armor-plating reknits and shattered mechanical organs are rebuilt. The only way, then, to assure a Necron's destruction is to overwhelm its ability to self-repair, to inflict such massive damage that its ancient regenerative systems cannot keep pace. Even then, should irreparable damage occur, the Necron will often simply phase out. An automated Viridian teleportation beam returning it to the safety of the stasis crypts, where it remains in storage until such time as repairs can be carried out. The sciences by which such feats are achieved remain a mystery to outsiders, for the Necrons do not share their secrets with lesser species and have set contingencies to prevent their supreme technologies from falling into the wrong hands. Should a fallen Necron warrior fail to phase out, it self-destructs and is consumed in a blaze of emerald light. Outwardly, this appears little different to the glow of teleportation, leaving the foe to wonder whether the Necron has finally been destroyed or has merely retreated to its tomb. Victory over the Necrons is therefore always a tenuous thing, and a hard-won battle grants little surety of ultimate victory. For the Necrons, defeats are minor inconveniences, the preludes to future triumphs, nothing more. Immortality has brought patience. The perils that the Necrons survived in ancient times carry the lesson their people can overcome any opposition if they have but the will to try. And if the Necrons possess only a single trait, it is a will as unbending as adamantium. Only one hope can now preserve the other intelligent species of the galaxy from the Necrons' advance, from the endless legions of silent and deathless warriors rising from long-forgotten tombs. If the Necrons can be prevented from waking to their full glory, if the scattered tomb worlds can be prevented from unifying, then there is a chance of survival. If not, then the great powers of the galaxy will surely fall, and the Necrons shall rule supreme for all eternity, undying, cruel, and utterly implacable. The birth of the entities called the Catan and later known as the Star Gods occurred at the same time as the moment of creation itself, as they formed from the vast insensate energies first unleashed by that churning mass of cataclysmic force. In that anarchic interweaving of matter and energy, the sea of stars began to swirl into existence, and for an eon, the universe was nothing more than hot hydrogen gas and light elemental dust ruled over by the gravitic force of billions of newborn suns. Long before the first planets had formed and cooled, the very first truly self-aware beings emerged into the universe, their thoughts encased within the lines of force produced by the plasma and electromagnetic flares of the stars themselves. In later times, these entities would become known as the Catan by the Necrons, but early in their existence, they were nothing like the malevolent beings they would eventually become. They were little more than monstrous energy parasites that suckled upon the solar energies of the stars that had brought them into existence, shortening the lives of otherwise main-sequence stars by millions of standard years. In time, these star vampires learned to move along the lines of the universe's electromagnetic flux, leaving their birthplaces to drift through the cosmic ether to new stellar feeding grounds and begin their cycle of stellar destruction once more. Beings of pure energy, they paid no mind to the hunks of solid matter they passed in the vacuum of space, the blazing geothermal fires and weak geomagnetic fields of these nascent planets, insufficient to be worth feeding even their ravenous hunger. Just as the stars gave birth to their children, so the planets of the newborn Milky Way galaxy eventually gave birth to life forms composed of matter, which began the long evolutionary climb to self-awareness. The first intelligent beings of the galaxy, known to have developed a civilization technologically advanced enough to cross the stars, was a reptilian species of beings later called the Old Ones by the Aldari, who knew them best of all their creations. The Old Ones possessed a slow, cold-blooded, but still deep wisdom, having long studied the stars and raised astronomy and physics to such a level that their science and technology appear now to humanity like an arcane art. Their understanding of the workings of the universe were such that they could manipulate alternate dimensions and undertake great works of psychic engineering. The Old Ones were potent psychers who routinely used the powers of the warp for a wide variety of technological applications. This included the construction of a system of instantaneous faster-than-light portals through warp space. These portals connected all of the Old Ones' colony worlds, allowing them to cross the vast gulfs of space with only a single step through the myriad warp gates they built to connect the worlds of the galaxy. This was a vast interdimensional network, much like the webway of today, which is its direct descendant, though on a much larger and more advanced scale. Through this network, the Old Ones spread their spawn to many places in the galaxy, but they also knew that all life was precious. Where they passed, they seeded new intelligent species and reshaped thousands of worlds to make them their own according to their predetermined environmental and geographic criteria. It is believed by some in the Adeptus Mechanicus that even Terra felt the Old Ones' touch long before humanity's rise to self-awareness, though this notion is considered heretical at best by the ecclesiarchy, as the imperial creed teaches that mankind was made in the image of the god emperor before his spirit was incarnated in physical flesh millennia ago. The Old One's civilization reached its height in excess of 60 million standard years ago. The Old Ones were responsible for the creation or genetic advancement of most of the currently active intelligent species of the galaxy, including the Aldari, the Krork, the Orcs precursors, the Slan, and the Jokairo, though it is unknown if they played any direct role in the evolution of humanity. The humanoid species that would become the Necrons began their existence under a fearsome, scourging star in the far reaches of the galaxy known as the Halo Stars region, billions of standard years before humanity evolved on old Earth. Assailed at every moment by solar winds and intense radiation storms, the flesh and blood species known as the Necrontyr became a morbid people whose precarious lifespans were riven by constant loss. What little information the Imperium of Man has recovered on the Necrontyr tells that their lives were short and uncertain, their bodies blighted and consumed at an early age by the terrible cancers and other illnesses linked to the high levels of ionizing radiation given off by their sun. Necrontyr cities were built in anticipation of their inhabitants' early demise, as the living were only brief residents scratching their daily livelihoods in the shadow of the vast sepulchres and tombs of their ancestors. Likewise, their ruling dynasties were founded on the anticipation of an early death, and the living were thought of as no more than temporary residents hurrying through the more permanent and lasting structures raised to honor the dead. On the Necrontyr homeworld, the greatest monuments were always built for the dead, never the living. Driven by necessity, the Necrontyr escaped their crucible prison and struck out for the stars, hopeful of carving out an empire in which they could realize their species' freedom from the lethal energies of their birth star. Using stasis crypts and slow-moving, antimatter-powered torch ships that were clad in the living metal known as Necrodermis to resist the millennia-long journeys through the void, the Necrontyr began to colonize distant worlds. Little by little, the Necrontyr dynasties spread ever further until much of the ancient galaxy answered to their rule. From the earliest days, the rulers of individual Necrontyr dynasties were themselves governed by the Triarch, a council composed of 3 Necron dynasty monarchs known as Pharaons. The head of the Triarch was known as the Silent King, for he addressed his subjects only through the other 2 Pharaons who ruled alongside him. Nominally a hereditary position, the uncertain lifespans of the Necrontyr ensured that the title of Silent King nonetheless passed from one royal dynasty to another many times. The final days of the Necrontyr Empire occurred in the reign of Sarek, the last of the Silent Kings. Sometime during their slow interstellar expansion, the Necrontyr encountered an ancient species far older than any other in existence in the known galaxy. These beings were the Old Ones, and they were absolute masters of forms of energy the Necrontyr could not even conceive of, yet alone wield. The Old Ones had long ago conquered the secrets of immortality, yet they refused to share the gift of eternal life with the Necrontyr, who yet bore the genetic curse of the bitter star they had been born under. The colonization of much of the galaxy by the reptilian mystics had been immeasurably swifter and more expansive than that of the Necrontyr because of their warp gates and mastery of the immaterium. That, and the Old Ones' incredibly long, if not downright immortal lifespans, kindled a burning, jealous rage in the Necrontyr, which ate at their culture spiritually as much as physical cancers consumed their bodies. The Necrontyr were astonished to learn that another intelligent species enjoyed such long lives while their own were cut so brutally short. But as time wore on, further strife came to the Necrontyr. Each dynasty sought to claim its own destiny, and soon the great houses were engaged in all-out conflicts known as the Wars of Secession. Had circumstances remained as they were for but a generation more, it is possible that the Necrontyr would have wiped themselves out, as so many species had before them and shall do in the future. As their territory grew ever wider and more diverse, the unity that had made them strong was eroded, and bitter wars were waged as entire realms fought to win independence. Ultimately, the Triarch realized that the only hope of unity for their people lay in conflict with an external enemy, but there were few who could prove a credible threat to the technologically advanced Necrontyr. Only the Old Ones were a prospective foe, powerful enough to bind the feuding Necrontyr dynasties to a common cause. Such a war was simplicity itself to justify, for the Necrontyr had ever rankled at the Old Ones' refusal to share the secrets of eternal life. So it was that Sarek, the last of the Silent Kings, in a typically bitter act of jealousy and resentment for the Necrontyr race, declared war on the Old Ones. At the same time, he offered amnesty to any secessionist Necrontyr dynasties who willingly returned to the fold of the Triarch. Thus, lured by the spoils of victory and the promise of immortality, the separatist Necrontyr realms abandoned their wars of secession, and what was later known as the War in Heaven began. A conflict unlike any fought before erupted across the stars. Yet while the Silent King and the Triarch had succeeded in uniting their hateful people, it was a war the Necrontyr could not win, not on their own. The terrible wars between the Old Ones and the Necrontyr that followed, known later in Aldari myth as the War in Heaven, would fill a library in their own right, but the Necrontyr could never win. Their superior technology was consistently outmaneuvered by the Old Ones, thanks to their mastery of the webway portals and warp gates. The Necrontyr were pushed back until they were little more than an irritation to the Old Ones' dominance of the galaxy, a quiescent threat clinging to their irradiated world among the halo stars, exiled and forgotten. The Necrontyr's fury was cooled by their long millennia of imprisonment on their homeworld, slowly transforming into an utter hatred towards all other forms of intelligent life and an implacable determination to avenge themselves upon their seemingly invincible enemies. But in the face of defeat, the always fragile unity of the Necrontyr began to fracture once more. No longer did the prospect of a common enemy have any hold over the disparate dynasties. Scores of generations had now lived and died in the service of an unwinnable war, and many Necrontyr dynasties would have gladly sued for peace with the Old Ones if the ruling Triarch had permitted it. Thus began the second iteration of the Wars of Secession, more widespread and ruinous than any that had come before. So fractured had the Necrontyr dynasties become by then that, had the Old Ones been so inclined, they could have wiped out their foes with ease. Faced with the total collapse of their rule, the Triarchs searched desperately for a means of restoring order. In this, their prayers were answered, though the price for their species would be incalculably high. It was during the reign of the Silent King Sarek that the godlike energy beings known as the Khitan first blighted the Necrontyr. It is impossible to say for certain how the Necrontyr first made contact with the Khitan, though many misleading, contradictory, and one-sided accounts of these events exist. The dusty archives of the tomb world of Solemnace claim it was but an accident, a chance discovery made by a stellar probe during the investigation of a dying star. The Book of Mournful Night, held under close guard in the Aldari Black Library's innermost sanctum, tells rather that the raw hatred that the Necrontyr held as a species for the Old Ones sang out across space, acting as a beacon that the Khitan could not ignore. Another account claims that from the earliest days of their civilization, Necrontyr scientists had been deeply engaged in stellar studies to try to understand and protect themselves from their own sun's baleful energies. After long, bitter centuries of searching for some power to unleash upon the Old Ones, the Necrontyr researchers used stellar probes to discover unusual electrodynamic anomalies in the oldest dying stars of the galaxy. In the complex skeins of the energetic plasma of these suns, the Necrontyr found an intelligence that was more ancient than that of any of the corporeal species in creation, including the Old Ones, entities of pure energy that had spawned during the birth of the stars eons before. These entities had little conception of what the rest of the universe entailed when the Necrontyr first found them, feeding upon the solar flares and magnetic storms of these bloated red giants. Here was the weapon the Necrontyr had long sought to bring about the downfall of the Old Ones, beings they believed were the progeny of the death god they had long worshipped. Howsoever first contact occurred, the shadow of the C'tan fell over the oldest Necrontyr dynasties first. The power of these star-born creatures was incredible. The raw energy of the stars made animate, and the Necrontyr called them the C'tan, or star gods, in their own tongue. The C'tan were dispersed across areas larger than whole planets, their consciousnesses too vast for humanoids to comprehend. How the Necrontyr ever managed to communicate with them is unknown to the Adeptus Mechanicus. Understanding that such diffuse minds could never perceive the material universe without manifesting themselves in a material form, some Necrontyr actively sought the C'tan's favor and oversaw the forging of physical shells for the C'tan to occupy, cast from the living metal called Necrodermis that they had once used for their colony torch ships. Fragmentary Eldari legends tell of translucent streamers of electromagnetic force shifting across space as the star vampires coiled into their new bodies in the physical realm across an incorporeal bridge of starlight. Thus clad, the C'tan took the physical shapes of the Necrontyr's half-forgotten gods, hiding their own true desires beneath cloaks of obsequious subservience. Incomprehensible forces were compressed into the living metal of the Necrodermis bodies, which the Necrontyr had forged as the full power of the C'tan at last found form. As the C'tan focused their consciousnesses and became ever more aware of their new mode of existence, they came to appreciate the pleasures available to beings of matter and the other realities of corporeal life. The deliciously focused trickles of electromagnetic energy given off by the physical bodies of the Necrontyr all about them awakened a new hunger in the C'tan, very unlike the one they had once sated, using the nourishing but essentially tasteless energies of the stars. So it was that one of the C'tan came before the silent king Sarek, acting as forerunner to the coming of his brothers. Amongst his own kind, this C'tan was known as Mephatron, the Deceiver, for he was willfully treacherous. Yet the silent king did not know this C'tan's true nature, and instead granted the creature an audience. The Deceiver spoke of a war fought long before the birth of the Necrontyr between the C'tan and the Old Ones. It was a war, he said, that the C'tan had lost. In the aftermath, and fearing the vengeance of the Old Ones, he and his brothers had hidden themselves away, hoping one day to find allies with whom they could finally bring the Old Ones to account. In return for this aid, the Deceiver assured he and his brothers would deliver everything that the Necrontyr craved. Unity could be theirs once again, and the immortality that they had sought for so long would finally be within their grasp. No price would there be for these great gifts, the Deceiver insisted, for they were but boons to be bestowed upon valued allies. Thus did the Deceiver speak, and who can say how much of his tale was truth? It is doubtful whether even the Deceiver knew, for trickery had become so much a part of his existence that even the C'tan could no longer divine its root. Yet his words held sway over Sarek, who, like his ancestors before him, despaired of the divisions that were once again tearing his people apart. For long solar months he debated the matter with the other two pharaons of the Triarch and the nobles of his royal court. Through it all, the only dissenting voice was that of Orican, the court astrologer of the Triarch, who foretold that the alliance between the Necrontyr and the C'tan would bring about a renaissance of glory, but destroy forever the soul of the Necrontyr people. Yet desire and ambition swiftly overrode caution, and Orican's prophecy was dismissed. A Necrontyr year after the Deceiver had presented his proposition, the Triarch agreed to the alliance, and so forever doomed their species. For their part, the Necrontyr soon fell into awe of their discoveries, and the C'tan moved to take control over their benefactors. The powers of the C'tan manifested in the physical world were indeed almost godlike, and it was not long before the C'tan were being worshipped as the star gods the Necrontyr had named them. Perhaps they had been tainted by the material universe they had become a part of, or perhaps this had always been their nature even when they were bound to the suns they fed upon. But the C'tan proved to be as cruel and capricious as the stars from which they had been born. They soon reveled in the religious worship of the Necrontyr and feasted upon the electromagnetic life energies of countless mortal slaves.
When the Silent King saw what had been done, he knew at last the true nature of the C'tan and of the doom they had wrought in his name.
Armed with weapons of godlike power and starships that could cross the galaxy in the blink of an eye through the use of quantum phase technology, the Necrontyr stood ready to begin their war against the Old Ones anew. But the C'tan had another gift for their mortal subjects. They offered the Necrontyr a path to immortality and the physical stability their species had always craved. Their diseased flesh would be replaced with the living metal of Necrodermis that made up their star god's own physical forms. Their discarded organic husks would be consumed, and their cold metal forms would then be free to pursue their great vengeance against the Old Ones and the rest of a hateful universe, freed forever from the weaknesses of their hated flesh. With the pact between Necrontyr and C'tan sealed, the star gods revealed the form that immortality would take for the Necrontyr, and the great biotransference process began. Vast biofoundries were constructed, and into these the Silent King's peoples marched according to the terms of the pact he had made with the C'tan. What blasphemous procedures the Necrontyr were subjected to within the raging bio-furnaces cannot be known, but certainly each was stripped of flesh and of soul, their body replaced by a shell of living metal Necrodermis, much like the C'tan themselves, animated by what remained of their guttering self. Above each furnace swooped and dove the ethereal true forms of the C'tan as they glutted themselves on the spiritual and electromagnetic detritus of an entire species. It was only when the Silent King himself emerged from the biotransference process and looked upon what had become of his people that he saw the awful truth of the pact he had made. Though immortality and nigh godlike strength and vigor were his, it had come at the cost of his soul, the etheric remains of which had already been sucked down the gullet of a circling C'tan. As Sarek watched the C'tan feast on the life essence of his people, he realized the terrible depth of his mistake. In many ways, he felt better than he had in Necrontyr decades, the countless aches and uncertainties of organic life now behind him. His new machine body was far mightier than the frail form he had tolerated for so long, and his thoughts were swifter and clearer than they had ever been. Yet there was a terrible emptiness gnawing at his mind, an inexpressible hollowness of spirit that defied rational explanation. In that moment, he knew with cold certainty that the price of physical immortality had been the loss of his soul. With great sorrow, the Silent King beheld the fate he had brought upon his people. The Necrontyr were now but a memory, and the soulless, undying Necrons had been reborn in their place. Yet if the price had been steep, biotransference had fulfilled all of the promises that the C'tan had made. Even the lowliest of the Necrontyr was now blessed with immortality. Age and hard ionizing radiation could little erode their new mechanical bodies, and only the most terrible of injuries could destroy them utterly. The biotransference process had embedded engrammatic command protocols in every Necron mind, granting Sarek the unswerving loyalty of his subjects. At first, the Silent King embraced this unanimity, for it was a welcome reprieve from the chaos and fractiousness that had consumed the Necrontyr Empire in recent years. The entire species was now his to command, and so it fell upon the Necrons to honor their side of their terrible bargain. However, as time wore on, Sarek grew weary of his burden, but dared not sever the command protocols, lest his subjects turn on him seeking vengeance for the terrible curse he had visited upon them. Biotransference had left behind only the ghostly echoes of the Necrontyr's consciousnesses. Only a few of the most strong-willed Necrontyr among the nobility and the military retained their intellect and self-awareness, and even they were but shadows of their former selves. They had been purged of so much of what had made them unique individuals. But unlike the Silent King, most of the Necrons at first cared not at all for their loss. All that mattered to them was that they would live forever without disease or death, as their star gods had promised. Renewed and empowered as never before by their devouring of the souls of an entire species, the C'tan were now unstoppable, and with the undying legions of the Necrons marching in their wake, the Old Ones were doomed. Only one thing truly remained of the old Necrontyr: their burning hatred for all the other living, intelligent species of the universe. Legions of the undying living metal warriors set out into the galaxy in their tomb ships, and the stars burned in their wake. The Old One's mastery of the warp was now countered by the C'tan's supremacy over the physical universe, and the ancient enemies of the Necrons suffered greatly in the interstellar slaughter that followed. With the C'tan and the Necrons fighting as one, the Old Ones were now doomed to defeat. Glutted on the life force of the Necrontyr, the empowered C'tan were able to unleash forces beyond comprehension. Planets were razed, suns extinguished, and whole star systems devoured by black holes called into being by the reality-warping powers of the star gods. Necron Legions finally breached the webway and assailed the Old Ones in every corner of the galaxy. They brought under siege the fortresses of the Old Ones' many allies amongst the younger intelligent species of the galaxy, harvesting the life force of the defenders to feed their voracious C'tan masters. In the closing years of the War in Heaven, one of the primary factors that led to the Necrons' ascendancy was their ability to finally gain access to the Old Ones' webway. The C'tan, known as Niadrazath, the Burning One, had long desired to carry his eldritch fires into that space beyond space, and so showed the Necrons how to breach its extra-dimensional boundaries. Through a series of living stone portals known as the Dolmen Gates, the Necrons were finally able to turn the Old One's greatest weapon against them, vastly accelerating the ultimate end of the War in Heaven. The portals offered by the Dolmen Gates are neither so stable nor so controllable as the naturally occurring entrances to the webway scattered across the galaxy. Indeed, in some curious fashion, the webway can detect when its environs have been breached by a dolmen gate, and its arcane mechanisms swiftly attempt to seal off the infected spur from the rest of the labyrinth dimension until the danger to its integrity has passed. Thus, Necrons entering the webway must reach their intended destination through its shifting extra-dimensional corridors quickly, lest the network itself bring about their destruction. Of course, in the present age, eons have passed since the Necrons used the Dolmen Gates to assault their arch-enemies. The Old Ones are gone, and the webway itself has become a tangled and broken labyrinth. Many Dolmen Gates were lost or abandoned during the time of the Necrons' Great Sleep, and many more were destroyed by the Eldari, the Old Ones' successors as the guardians of the webway. Those that remain grant access to but a small portion of the immense maze that is the webway, much of that voluntarily sealed off by the Eldari to prevent further contamination. Yet the webway is immeasurably vast, and even these sundered skeins allow the Necrons a mode of travel that far outpaces those of the younger races. It is well that this is so. As a species bereft of psychers as a result of the loss of their souls during the biotransference process, the Necrons are also incapable of warp travel, and without access to the webway, they would be forced to rely once more on slow-voyaging stasis ships, dooming them to interstellar isolation. In the wake of these victories, the C'tan and their undying Necron servants now dominated the galaxy. The last planetary bastions of the Old Ones were besieged, and the intelligent species they had once nurtured became cattle for the obscene hunger of the C'tan. To the younger intelligent species of the galaxy, the Necrons and their star gods were cruel masters, callously harvesting their populations at will to feed the C'tan's ceaseless hunger for life energies. The C'tan were figures of terror who demanded mortals' adoration and fear in equal measure. For unknown reasons, but probably because their individual hungers for mortal life energies knew no bounds, the C'tan ultimately began to fight amongst themselves for both sport and out of spite. Among the Aldari, an ancient myth holds that their laughing god tricked the C'tan known as the Outsider into turning on its brothers and beginning their long war for ascendancy. In the course of the C'tan's struggle against one another, whole planets were razed, stars were extinguished, and entire solar systems were devoured by unleashed black holes. New cities were built by the efforts of millions and then smashed down once more. As the red harvests of the C'tan and their Necron servants grew thin, C'tan eventually devoured C'tan until only a few were left in the universe, and they competed amongst themselves for a long age. Eventually, even the Old Ones, who had once been defined by their patience and unstoppable will, became desperate in the face of the Necron assault. They used their great scientific skills to genetically engineer intelligent beings with an even stronger psychic link to the warp, hoping to create servants with the capability of channeling psychic power to defend themselves. They nurtured many potential warrior species, among which are believed to be the earliest members of the Aldari species and many other Xenos races, including the Rashan, the Kniib, the Krork, and many others. Terran millennia passed as the Old Ones' creations and experiments finally bore fruit, even as the C'tan and their Necron servants continued to extinguish life across the galaxy. The Old Ones' psychically empowered servant species spread across the galaxy, battling the advanced Necron technology with the psychic power of their warp-spawned magic. Facing this new onslaught, the C'tan's empire was shattered, as the psychic forces of the Immaterium were anathema to soulless entities whose existence was wholly contained within purely physical patterns of electromagnetic force. For all the destruction they could unleash, they were unable to stop the Old Ones and the younger races' relentless advance across the stars. The remaining C'tan, unified by this great threat for the first time in millions of Terran years, sought a way to defeat the soul-fueled energies of the younger species. They initiated a great warding, a plan to forever defeat the psychic sorceries of the Old Ones by sealing off the material universe from the warp, a plan whose first fruits could once be found on the imperial fortress world of Cadia in the form of the great pylons that littered the surface of that world in intricate networks and create the area of space-time stability near the Eye of Terror, known as the Cadian Gate. With their godlike powers, it was only a matter of time until the C'tan succeeded. But before their great work was complete, the seeds of destruction the Old Ones had planted millennia before brought about an unforeseen cataclysm. The growing pains and collective psychic flaws of the younger species threw the untapped, psychically reactive energies of the Immaterium into disorder. War, pain, and destruction were mirrored in the bottomless depth of the Sea of Souls that was the warp. The maelstrom of souls unleashed into the Immaterium by the carnage of the war in heaven coalesced in the previously formless energies of the warp. Older entities that had existed within the Immaterium transformed into terrifying psychic predators, tearing at the souls of vulnerable psychers as their own environment was torn apart and reforged into the realm of chaos. The denizens of the warp, stirred into a frenzy by the conflict in the Materium, clustered voraciously at the cracks between the Immaterium and the material universe, seeking new ways to enter the physical realm. The Old Ones brought forth new genetically engineered warrior species to defend their last strongholds, including the technology mimicking Jokairo and the formidable green-skinned Krork, who were the ancestors of the present-day Orcs. But it was already too late. The Old Ones' intergalactic webway network was breached from the Immaterium and lost to them. Several of their warp gates were destroyed by their own hands to prevent the entities of the warp from spreading to uncorrupted worlds, and the Old Ones' greatest works and places of power were overrun by the horrors their own creations had unleashed. The most terrifying of these horrors were the Enslavers, warp entities whose ability to dominate the minds of the younger species and create their own portals into the material realm using mutated, possessed psychers brought them forth in ever greater numbers. For the Old Ones, this was the final disaster as the enslavers took control of their servants. The Pandora's box, unleashed by the creation of the younger species, finally scattered the last of the Old Ones and broke their power over the galaxy once and for all. Life had stood at the edge of an apocalypse during the war in heaven between the Old Ones and the C'tan. Now, as the enslavers breached the immaterium in epidemic proportions, the survivors looked doomed. Ultimately, beset by the implacable onset of the C'tan and the calamitous warp-spawned perils they had themselves mistakenly unleashed, the Old Ones were defeated, scattered, and finally destroyed. Whether the species went extinct or simply fled the galaxy to seek a new haven elsewhere is unknown. Throughout the final stages of the war in heaven, Zarek bided his time, waiting for the moment in which the C'tan would prove most vulnerable. Though the entire Necron species was now his to command, the Silent King could not hope to oppose the C'tan at the height of their power, and even if he did and met with success, the Necrons would then have to finish the war in heaven against the Old Ones and their increasingly potent allied species alone. No, the Old Ones had to be completely and utterly defeated before the C'tan could be brought to account for the horror they had wrought among the Necrontyr. And so, when the C'tan finally won their great war, their triumph was short-lived. With one hated enemy finally defeated and the other spent from hard-fought victory, the Silent King at last led the Necrons in revolt. In their arrogance, the C'tan did not realize their danger until it was too late. The Necrons focused the unimaginable energies of the living universe into weapons, god-killing hypercannons devised by the finest cryptechs in the galaxy, too mighty for even the star gods to endure. Not even the great overlords of the Necron crown worlds well remember the battles against the star gods, for causality itself was damaged by the forces unleashed to dismember the C'tan, and the Silent King was wont to remove the knowledge of the dreadful weapons employed from his warriors after the fact in fear of what might later be done with them. Alas, the C'tan were immortal star spawn, part of the fundamental fabric of reality, and therefore nigh impossible to destroy. So was each C'tan instead sundered into thousands of smaller and less powerful energetic fragments, each with the personality of the whole entity, yet this outcome was sufficient to the Silent King's goals. Indeed, he had known the C'tan's ultimate destruction to be impossible and had drawn his plans accordingly. Each newborn C'tan shard was bound within a multi-dimensional tesseract labyrinth, as trammeled and secured as a legendary Terran gin trapped in a bottle. Though the cost of victory was high, millions of Necrons had been destroyed as a consequence of their rebellion, including all of the members of the Triarch save the Silent King himself. The Necrons were once more in command of their own destiny. The Necrons had been vindicated in their pursuit only of science and control over the material realm, and certainly took pleasure in seeing the Old One's civilization collapse as a result of their overindulgence of psychic power and the end of the C'tan's domination over their species. Yet even with the defeat of the Old Ones and the C'tan alike, the Silent King saw that the time of the Necrons in the galaxy was over, for the moment at least. They would allow the enslavers to take what was left of the intelligent life in the galaxy and let it become an interstellar wasteland. The Psyker Swarm would then die away, and in time the galaxy would evolve new life forms who would be less sophisticated and easier to dominate. In addition, the Necrons understood that the mantle of galactic dominion was soon to pass to the Eldari, one of the psychically potent species that had fought alongside the Old Ones throughout the war in heaven, and had thus come to hate the Necrons and all their works with the burning passion that is the defining characteristic of that species. The Eldari had survived where the Old Ones had not, and the Necrons, weakened by their expenditure of lives and resources in overthrowing the rule of the C'tan, could not stand against them. Yet the Silent King knew that the time of the Eldari would eventually pass, as it must pass for all those beings still cloaked in flesh. It would take millions of Terran years for the Eldari's power to fade, but what mattered is that the Necrons would be there to take advantage of it. So it was that the Silent King ordered the remaining Necron cities to be transformed into great tomb complexes threaded with stasis crypts. Let the Aeldari shape the galaxy for a time. They were but ephemeral, whilst the Necrons were undying and eternal. The Silent King's final command to his people was that they must sleep for the equivalent of 60 million standard years, but awake ready to rebuild all that they had lost, to restore the Necron dynasties to their former glory. This was the Silent King's final order, and as the last tomb world sealed its subterranean vaults, Zarek destroyed the engrammatic command protocols by which he had controlled his people for so long, for he had failed them utterly. Without a backward glance, Zarek, the last of the Silent Kings of the Triarch, took ship into the starless void of intergalactic space, there to find whatever measure of solace or penance he could. Meanwhile, eons passed and the Necrons slept on, their machine slaves and constructs guarding them while they slept on tomb worlds that had been purged of all life to keep the enslavers from their door. This plan worked with an amazing degree of success until the Necrons were awakened by the forces of the Imperium of Man in the 41st Millennium to plague the galaxy once more. They discovered a new and unexpected age of interstellar civilization and war, much like the one they had left behind 60 million standard years before. The galaxy is blossoming with life once more, but is still overrun with latent psychers and worshippers of the infernal chaos warp energies first unleashed during the war in heaven. It will take time and a great many machinations for the Necron dynasties to regain their rightful place as the rulers of the galaxy. The agents of chaos must be overthrown, the dangerous Aeldari, inheritors of the Old One's mantle, eliminated, humanity subjugated, and the great work cutting off the material universe from the warp completed before a new age of Necron dominion can truly begin. But the Necrons are ageless and undying, their technology still unmatched by any of the younger starfaring species, and time is always on their side.
Adversary, know that your squalid colony rests upon our rightful crown world of the Novak dynasty. Know also that whilst your presence cannot be tolerated, we are bound by code of honor to allow you opportunity to withdraw. You are therefore granted one solar month, commencing at termination of this transmission, to remove all trace of your presence. If you fail to accept this generous offer, my armies shall conclude these negotiations. We advise you not to mistake honorable warning for lack of resolve.
None can say for sure how many tomb worlds entered the Great Sleep, but it is certain that a great many did not survive into the 41st Millennium. Technologically advanced though the Necrons were, to attempt a stasis sleep of such scale and duration was a great risk, even for them. For 60 million Terran years, the Necrons slept, voicelessly waiting for their chance to complete the Silent King's final order, to restore the Necron dynasties to their former glory. As the centuries passed, ever more tomb worlds fell prey to malfunction or ill fortune. For many, the results were minor, such as a disruption to the operation of the tomb world's chronostat or revivification chambers, causing the inhabitants to awaken later than intended. But some of the tomb worlds suffered more calamitous events. Cascade failures of stasis crypts destroyed millions, if not billions, of dormant Necrons. Some tomb worlds were destroyed by the retribution of marauding Aeldari, their defense systems overmatched by these ancient enemies of the Necrons. Other tomb worlds fell victim to the uncaring evolution of the galaxy itself. Tectonically unstable planets crushed Necron strongholds slumbering at their hearts. Stars went supernova, consuming orbiting tomb worlds in their death throes. And everywhere, inquisitive life forms scrabbled and fought over the bones of Necron territories, causing more damage in their unthinking search for knowledge than the vengeful Aeldari ever could. The Great Awakening has been far from precise, and the Necrons have not arisen as one people but in fitful starts over scattered millennia, like some gestalt sleeper rising from a troubled dream. Errors in circuitry and protocols ensured that a revivification destined to take place in the early years of the 41st millennium of the imperial calendar actually began far earlier in a few cases, or has yet to occur at all in others. The very first tomb worlds revived to see the great crusade of the Emperor of Mankind sweep across the galaxy in the late 30th millennium. A handful stirred in time to see the Nova Terra Interregnum, when Nova Terra challenged the might of the Golden Throne in the 34th millennium for 900 years, or arose at the hour in which the apostles of the Blind King waged their terrible wars that began in 550. M37. Some have still never awoken. Even now, in the era Indomitus of the 41st millennium, billions of Necrons still slumber in their stasis tombs, silently awaiting the clarion call of destiny. It is rare for a tomb world to awaken to full function swiftly. With but the slightest flaw in the revivification cycle, the engrammatic pathways of a Necron sleeper scatter and degrade. In most cases, these coalesce over time to restore identity and purpose, but it is a process that can take solar decades or even Terran centuries and cannot be hurried. Sometimes recovery never occurs, and the sleeper is doomed forever to a mindless state. There are thousands of tomb worlds scattered throughout the galaxy whose halls are thronged with shambling automatons, Necrons whose minds fled during the long hibernation, and whose bodies have been co-opted by a tomb world's master autonomic program in an attempt to bring some form of order to their existence. Other Necrons refer to such places as the Severed Worlds, and they loathe and fear their inhabitants in equal measure. None of this is to say that even an individual Necron lucky enough to achieve a flawless revivification awakens alert and aware. One of the hidden tyrannies of Biotransference was how it entrenched the gulf between the rulers and the ruled, for there were not enough resources to provide all Necrontyr with living metal bodies that possessed the density of engrammatic pathways required to retain the full gamut of personality and awareness. Thus, as was ever the case, the very finest Necrodermis bodies went to those individuals of the highest rank within Necrontyr society, the Pharaons and Overlords, their Cryptex and Nemesors. For the professional soldiery, the merely adequate was deemed appropriate. As for the common people, they received that which remained, comparatively crude mechanical bodies that were little more than lobotomized prisons for their minds. Numb to all joy and experience, they are bound solely to the will of their betters, their function meaningless without constant direction. Yet even here a tiny spark of self-awareness remains, enough only to torment the Necron with vague memories and echoes of the past it once knew. For these tortured creatures, death would be far preferable, but alas, they no longer have the wit to realize it or the autonomy to search it out. Having slept so still and for so long, it is not possible for a tomb world to awaken quickly into a fully alert state. While dormant, each tomb world's stasis tombs are controlled by a master artificial intelligence program, known as the Deep Spirit or Tomb Mind, that oversees its essential maintenance and defense, mobilizing what resources it judges appropriate to any given situation or threat. As the long-awaited time of awakening nears, as best can be judged by each tomb mind, more of its systems are brought online and more of the interred revived. A tomb world is at its most vulnerable during the revivification process. The colossal amounts of energy generated are detectable across light years and are an irresistible lure to the inquisitive and acquisitive alike. In its early stages, a tomb world's defense lies in the hands of the Necron's robotic servitor constructs, the Canoptech spiders, scarabs, and wraiths. Initially, these defenders will be directed by the tomb world's tomb mind, whose complex algorithmic decision matrix allows it to calculate an efficient response to any perceived threat. As the threat level rises, so too does the intensity of the master program's countermeasures, prioritizing the activation of the tomb world's automated defenses and the revivification of its armies according to the needs of the situation at hand. If all goes well, the master program's actions will be sufficient to drive out the invader, or at least stall their progress until the first Necron Legions have awoken. Often it is the lower order of Necrons, the Necron warriors and immortals, that are awakened in the initial phases. These nearly mindless automatons, following their lifeless protocols, are brought online first, so that the way might be prepared for the more senior members of the dynasty. As each tier in the Necron dynasty's hierarchy is revived, each more intelligent and bearing more individuality than the last, the whole process gradually begins to appear more like the workings of an ancient civilization and less like that of some great machine. At the allotted time, a Necron overlord is awakened, and upon their full revival, the tomb mind cedes power to its creators. From that point onward, a truly ancient mind leads the tomb world, and what happens next depends entirely upon their character and ambition. Having been awakened and control turned over to an overlord, the tomb world must in time take its place in the domains of the Necron dynasty that created it. While many dynasties have never awakened and, due to a variety of disasters, never will, many are slowly piecing together their former domains. One world at a time, empires that vanished eons ago are being rebuilt, and long-dormant hierarchies are reasserting themselves once more. At the center of each of these risen empires is a crown world, the glorious capital and seat of the Pharaon who rules an entire dynasty. Below it are numerous lesser tomb worlds and other Necron holdings, though rarely are these anywhere near as extensive as they were in their full glory 60 million standard years ago. When a large population center of a younger race of the galaxy has evolved or expanded across the stars close to a tomb world, the encoded programming delves deep into its data archives and armories in order to conduct an aggressive defense. Such tomb worlds are the ones that have expanded their spheres of influence most rapidly, for its rulers have awakened to find their full military might already mobilized and awaiting their commands. Indeed, the speed with which many tomb worlds of the Sautek dynasty have recovered lost territory is chiefly attributable to the ultimately doomed wave of Ulumiyathi colonies established on their core worlds during the late 39th millennium. To external observers, the behavior of awoken tomb worlds must seem eclectic, almost to the point of randomness. Some Necron lords send diplomatic emissaries to other worlds, negotiating for the return of lost territories and technological artifacts, or cast off into the stars, searching for distant tomb worlds not yet awoken. Others focus attention inwards, avoiding unnecessary conflict with alien races to pursue internal politics or oversee the rebuilding of their planet to the glory of 60 million years past. The vast majority of tomb worlds, however, take a more aggressive tack, launching resource raids, planetary invasions, or the full-blown genocidal purges the Necron's former Satan masters once called Red Harvests. Yet even here, it is impossible to predict the precise form these deeds will take. Sometimes the Necrons attack in the full panoply and spectacle of honorable war, rigorously applying their ancient codes of battle. At others, every possible underhanded tactic is employed, from piracy and deception to assassination and subornation. On other occasions, the campaign is less a martial action than a systematic extermination, the swatting of lesser life forms as they themselves would swat insects. All of these acts, diverse though they are in scope and method, are directed towards a single common goal: the restoration of the Necron dynasties to rule over the galaxy. Yet, with the Triarch long gone and huge numbers of tomb worlds lying desolate or still dormant, there can be no galaxy-wide coordination, no grand strategy that will bring about Necron ascendancy. Instead, each tomb world's ruler must fend for themselves, pursuing whatever course they deem most suited to circumstance. For some, this is the domination of nearby threats and the sowing of terror on alien worlds. For others, it might be the recovery of cultural treasures of the lost Necrontyr, the stockpiling of raw strategic materials for campaigns yet to come, or even the search for an organic species whose bodies might prove to be suitable vessels for Necron mines, thus finally ending the curse of biotransference. Indeed, this last matter, the apotheosis from undying machine back to living being, is the key motivating factor for many Necron nobles and royals, for its possibility weighed heavily on the Silent King's mind at the moment of his final command. All this is further complicated by the fact that the departure of the Silent King and the dissolution of the Necrontyr Empire's Triarch left no clear succession. As a result, the rulers of many tomb worlds see an opportunity not only to restore the dynasties of old, but also to improve their standing within the galaxy-wide Necron political hierarchy. The motives of Necron nobles and royals are often muddied by the pursuit of personal power, making accurate divination of an individual's intentions, and therefore of the campaigns conducted by their undying legions, nigh impossible. Only now, as more and more tomb worlds awaken, is a pattern becoming visible to those whose mission it is to stand watch upon the trackless reaches of the galaxy and beyond. Piecing together scattered accounts of skull-faced reaper machines rising from the dust of dead worlds the length and breadth of the galaxy, the xeno-savants of the Imperial Inquisition are faced with a stark realization. What at first appeared to be unrelated alien raids serving no overall purpose were, in fact, the heralds of a disaster of galactic proportions facing the Imperium of man. The Necrons are still a shadowy presence rather than a full-fledged force in the galaxy of the present time. They strike out of nowhere without warning, wreak havoc and leave before any major reinforcements can arrive. The origins of these various attacks and their motives are unknown, though it is known that the current Necron forces in the galaxy are only soul harvesters, not the full-fledged fighting machines of the Catan. They seem to attack from nowhere, often simply appearing at nearly any location in the galaxy, no matter how well defended. Once in the recent past, they touched down on Mars, simply passing by the Imperial Navy fleets protecting the Sol system unnoticed, and ultimately casting doubt on the impregnable status of Terra itself. The Necrons reached the red planet's surface and explored its subterranean Noctis Labyrinthus, perhaps in search of one of their Citan masters, believed to be the entity known in the legends of the Adeptus Mechanicus as the Dragon of Mars, before being destroyed by the agents of the Imperium. This incident, however, is a heavily guarded secret within the Imperium of Man, which greatly fears that the Necrons may awaken the entity, which may be the Catan called the Void Dragon, which inhabits a stasis tomb beneath the sands of Mars. At the same time, the Imperium has been unable to capture a Necron in an attempt to learn their secrets. Entire Necron forces simply vanish into thin air using their phase technology, and they always take their dead with them. The Necron forces come from tomb worlds as yet uncharted by the Imperium. Their phase technology allows them to deploy anywhere in the galaxy, almost instantaneously through unknown means. In defeat, they phase out and return to their associated tomb world for repairs. Any Necrons that have fallen in battle can be repaired there and reanimated, so their losses thus far have been minimal. Should a Necron be totally annihilated in battle, then they are truly beyond phase-out or repair, but again, often so little survives that the scientists of living races have nothing to study. The Necrons may have infiltrated the Imperium to an extent. Their elite anti-psyker troops, the Pariahs, are an unholy cross of human mutant and Necron technology. It is believed by some Adeptus Mechanicus savants that the Necrons had the Pariah gene engineered into what became the human gene pool over 60 million Terran years ago. This gene has since manifested itself in the agents of the Calexis Temple, the specialized anti-psyker assassins of the Officio Assassinorum. Recently, however, there has been a dramatic decrease in the use of Necron Pariahs in Necron armies, and the Ordo Xenos believes that these troops may not have proven as effective as Necron commanders had once hoped, and are being phased out of the Necron dynasty's order of battle. Of all the galaxy's great powers, only the craft world Aldari see the Necrons for the threat they truly are to all of the other sentient species. And even they cannot be sure how many tomb worlds slumber in the darkness. After the war in heaven, the Aldari took up a silent watch for any sign of Necron reemergence and set watch on worlds they suspected of nurturing hidden stasis tombs. Many such worlds were seeded with life and adopted as homes by Asuryani outcasts and exodites, whose descendants would maintain the vigil. Where this was not possible, suspected tomb worlds were marked on a great crystal map so that their locations would not be lost as the millennia passed. Yet, as the ages of the galaxy passed, the Aeldari became distracted by their own plights and thus forgot the duty they had sworn to uphold for their lost patrons, the Old Ones. By the time of the fall of the Aeldari in the 30th millennium, the terrible birth of the Chaos god Slaanesh, the slumbering Necrons had been all but forgotten. Only in the Black Library and amongst a few outspoken segments of Aeldari society did the vigil continue. For the Aeldari, the Necrons are a nightmare come to life. The children of Isha hold soullessness to be the very worst of all fates, and the Necrons, therefore, provoke an abiding terror that the Aeldari can never truly suppress. For the Seer Council of the Alaitok craft world, however, a time of terrible vindication is at hand. The Asuryani of Alaitok remembered their ancient duty whilst their peers forgot. They recovered the fragments of the great map from one of the crone worlds of the Eye of Terror, spread their networks of outcasts and exodites ever wider, and waited for the ancient enemy to return. So it is that whilst most Asuryani craft worlds are rehoning half-remembered strategies from the war in heaven, Alaitok is reaching its hand, assailing the Necrons on their own territory, sabotaging their tomb worlds and bringing the fight to their legions of undying warriors whenever the opportunity presents itself. Even in life, the Necrontyr civilization was one of strict protocol and process, governed by nobles whose rule was absolute. This rigid hierarchy became more entrenched during the transition from flesh to machine, and the awakening Necron civilization is far more complex and stratified than the one that once ruled the galaxy. Every Necron belongs to a royal dynasty, one of the great houses of the ancient Necrontyr Empire. Allegiance to a dynasty was once purely a matter of family and tradition, but it is now entrenched through conquest and programming. Every Necron noble is truly individualistic, and whilst they might share a common set of customs and loyalties, they rarely have a unity of purpose beyond that imposed by their superiors. Accordingly, whilst several neighboring worlds might owe allegiance to the same royal dynasty, the agendas they pursue depends entirely on the whims and goals of each Necron overlord or lord, rather than the broader traditions of the dynasty. Before the coming of the Ketan, there were many hundreds of Necrontyr dynasties. Some wielded vast political and military power, while others were vestigial and broken, mere echoes of once great noble houses. Through the wars of Secession, the rebellion against Biotransference and the Ketan, the war in heaven and the Great Sleep, many thousands of royal dynasties were destroyed. It is impossible to say how many survived, save that they number in the hundreds or possibly thousands. Those dynasties listed below can be considered the most powerful of those that remain, and are currently known to the Imperium of Man. The highest of the Necron nobles are the Pharaons, the rulers of entire dynasties, including many planetary systems. Beneath these monarchs are the Necron overlords, who rule clusters of tomb worlds within their Pharaon's domain. Lower still are the Necron lords, each charged with the keeping of a dynasty's single core or fringe world. So deeply are these titles mired in Necron tradition that they are universally constant across all of the dynasties. However, the titles of subordinate nobles and functionaries, which make up advisory councils and specialist convocations, are subject to an almost infinite variety. The ranking structures within the Necrontyr armies and fleets have remained constant, no matter how vast and disparate the dynasties have become. For example, every time any Necrons go to war, the title of Nemesaur is bestowed upon the overall commander of the battlefield or campaign, similar to a human general or admiral. This allows Necron armies from across the stars to join forces, even if they have never met, and suffer no decrease in efficiency. This entrenched command structure helped ease the transition of Imhotep the Stormlord from Nemesaur to Pharaon of the Sautek dynasty. Gravs, Vimarchs, and Thantars are but a few of the titles given to lower-tier Necron nobles. Almost identical in terms of rank and responsibility, the only real difference arises from which dynasty the individual hails. Many Necron titles are hereditary, dating to the earliest days of the Necrontyr. Some were relatively later inventions, crafted as a means by which nobles of lesser rank could be rewarded for their service. As the sphere of Necrontyr dominion expanded ever further, the scope and application of titles passed far beyond any form of central control. Each royal dynasty created ever more elaborate titles based on its own traditions as a means of self-justification. Like many civilizations, the more grandiose or long-winded the title, the more likely it was merely an attempt to disguise low status. This tanglework becomes particularly Byzantine when a pharaoh from one royal dynasty gains sway over a world from another. The resulting protocol is tedious beyond the endurance of living creatures, but for the Necron nobility, it is merely another way of whiling away eternity. To make matters worse, if a pharaoh is deposed or destroyed, their replacement will sometimes insist that all existing ranks be amended to reflect the traditions of their own house. To take such a step, the incumbent must be entirely sure of their own position, as a challenge to tradition is sure to rouse discontent within their own court. Every pharaoh and overlord is served by a royal court, which assists in the administration of tomb worlds and the execution of military campaigns. A royal court consists of a group of Necron lords, cryptex, and in the courts of pharaohs, overlords, who owe fealty to the ruler through oath or family bonds. Through flesh is long since a memory for the Necrons, ties of blood remain as important as they ever were to the Necrontyr. Each Necron lord will also be served by their own lesser courts. Only nobles of the very lowest ranks do not have courts of their own, yet even these mimic their betters by keeping a circle of untitled advisors from the most acceptably sentient of their vassals. Of course, given the paucity of wit in such advisors, these courts are but shadowed mockeries of the real things. However, in the ongoing battle for status and proper protocol among the Necrons, even a laughable court is considered better than no court at all. The size of a dynasty's royal court is not only important in terms of political status and prestige, it also determines a Necron noble's military status. The larger the royal court, the greater their seniority and the more troops under their command. Even a noble who lacks for a royal court commands a legion of Necron warriors, a few phalanxes of immortals and death marks, as well as a phalanx of Lich Guard. Added to this are forces not aligned to any particular dynasty. Triarch Praetorians, the surviving agents of the vanished Triarch ruling council, fight alongside any Nemesaur whom they judge to have the best interests of the dynasties at heart. Nihilistic Necron destroyers can be lured to a battle with promises of carnage and slaughter, whilst cryptex can be retained through acts of patronage. Few Necron nobles, no matter how desperate their plight, deliberately seek out the aid of the devolved flayed ones, although as these charnel creatures inevitably turn up to Necron battles of their own accord, this reluctance is of little account. The more senior a noble's position in a dynasty's hierarchy, the greater the number and quality of the troops they have authority over. Furthermore, a ranking noble also has indirect command over all the forces controlled by the members of their royal court, who, in turn, have authority over the forces controlled by their subordinates, and so on. As even the smallest of tomb worlds has at least 20 nobles of lesser rank, an overlord can commonly draw upon at least 100 legions of Necron warriors, should they have need. All Necrons, noble and common-born alike, are bound together by the symbol of the ancient Necrontyr Empire, the Ankh of the Triarch, as depicted above. Each of the royal dynasties also has its own glyph, the designs of which have remained unchanged over the eons. Necron nobles bear the dynasty's mark, normally upon a death mask, cloak, or sometimes as a stylized detail on personal weaponry or tokens of office. The most arrogant of nobles bear a glyph upon their breastplate in place of the Ankh of the Triarch, though to do so is to defy tradition and protocol. Only nobles of the highest rank are permitted to bear their dynasty's glyph in its fullest form. Those of lesser rank bear only elements of the glyph, symbolizing their position relative to a royal dynasty's heart of power. A handful of nobles do not bear a glyph at all. Some hail from royal dynasties destroyed during the War in Heaven, while others were stripped of rank and status for some long-ago transgression. In either event, such a noble is considered untrustworthy at best, with treachery either in their past or in their future. Dynastic glyphs are unique to Necron nobles. The common soldiery, such as Necron warriors and immortals, are largely considered to be interchangeable chattel by their noble masters. As such, they are thought unworthy of direct association with the proud lineage of a particular dynasty, although the colors of their Necrodermis death masks and armor sometimes echo ancient Necrontyr heraldry and thus indirectly reflect their allegiance. In contrast, Necron war engines, such as monoliths and doomsday arcs, are often marked with dynastic glyphs. They are considered to be the personal weaponry of a particular noble and therefore warrant a higher status than even the Necron warriors that crew them. For many of the galaxy's myriad intelligent species, the re-emergent Necrons are but one terror amongst many in the darkness between the stars. Even within the Imperium of Man, the Necrons are only dimly understood, with just a handful of individuals aware of the true scale of the threat they represent to humanity's dominion over the galaxy. Just as Necron society is rigidly hierarchical, so too are its tomb worlds. The most important are the crown worlds, oldest and proudest of all the Necron-held planets and the sites from which their dynasties and planetary clusters are governed. Crown worlds were once hubs of galactic power in the ancient days of Necron might, buttressed by tithe and tribute sent from elsewhere within the territory of their ruling dynasties. With access to such great resource wealth, crown worlds were able to construct the most reliable stasis crypts for their inhabitants. As a result, crown world inhabitants that have weathered the slumbering millennia without falling afoul of external circumstances have done so in excellent condition, though this only dampens the tragedy for the Necron race when a crown world is lost to galactic calamity. Next in importance for any Necron dynasty are core worlds, planets which together form the heart of a dynasty's interstellar territory. The rulers of core worlds would inevitably be the close kin to the regent of their dynasty's crown world, ensuring a bond of dynastic loyalty endured between the often diverse planets. Though neither so majestic nor so mighty as crown worlds, the core worlds were great powers to be reckoned with in their heyday and, barring disaster, are so again in the 41st millennium. Finally, Necron fringe worlds are planets of tertiary importance to their ruling dynasty, not viewed as being of high enough status to be numbered amongst a dynasty's core worlds. Fringe worlds were often poor or distant colonies of a dynasty, able to contribute to the wider realm only in terms of manual labor or as a location for penal institutions. Some fringe worlds will once have counted amongst the core worlds of a different dynasty, but have since been conquered or otherwise subsumed into the dominion of their current ruler, thus descending in status. There is no such thing as a typical Necron tomb world. Each answers only to the will of its noble ruler, and thus their proclivities define everything from its grand campaigns to trivialities such as architectural styles and forms of address between noble ranks. Nevertheless, there is one common cause that binds all tomb worlds: the rebuilding of the Necron dynasties of old, and the return of the Necrons to their rightful place of supremacy over the whole of the ignorant galaxy. The tomb worlds listed below represent no more than a handful of the many millions spread throughout the galaxy. Each revived world has its own idiosyncrasies, and the number is ever growing. Who can say how many far-flung outposts of mankind have their foundations set upon a planet long ago claimed by an immeasurably older civilization, its inhabitants blissfully unaware of the slumbering horror at their planet's core? In these days of the Necrons' awakening, no world in the galaxy can rest easy. Hibernating deep within the hearts of their tomb worlds, the Necrons have been dormant for more than 60 million Terran years. Scattered Necron raiding parties heralded the undying race's awakening to full activity once more in the 41st millennium. But now, as their thirsty star gods, the Shaitan, rise to a hungry wakefulness for life energy, the dreaded Necrontyr have returned to claim the galaxy for their own. Every Necron tomb world has been constructed to accord to a complex template that was devised by the Necrontyr at the height of their civilization. Utilizing physical principles and technology that have not been rediscovered by any other intelligent species since they began their long sleep, the Necrons created immense subterranean warehouses to store their race for the millions of Terran years they would spend inactive. Using their mastery of advanced interdimensional geometry, the Necrons built massive chambers that could house tens of thousands of their kind in a space seemingly larger on the inside than without. Deep beneath these pyramidal structures, the Necrons stored their horrific weaponry and erected powerful temporal stabilizers that would shield these warriors and their savage weapons from the ravages of time, much like a stasis field. Each tomb world, once it has been reactivated, awakens its sleepers in a rigid and predictable algorithmic sequence that is as inevitable as the dying of the stars. First, the tomb world releases swarms of robotic Canoptek scarab and Canoptek spider constructs to attend to the rudimentary needs of the stasis tombs. Soon after, the mindless Necron warriors are reawakened and begin reconnaissance patrols of the region of the world surrounding their tombs. Using the information gained by these Necron warrior scouting missions, the tomb world's automated systems, its tomb mind or deep spirit, assess the current circumstances that dominate its environment. According to ancient predetermined algorithms, the stasis tombs then bring online other Necron machineries and weapons as the circumstances warrant. The Necron Overlord or Necron Lords present on the tomb world are encoded with this information and the data necessary to form artificial personalities so that when they awaken, they can embody the singular purpose of the tomb world and make independent decisions. A large population center of one of the galaxy's younger races, usually humanity, may have been settled unwittingly on what is actually a Necron tomb world. When this situation is encountered, the tomb world's encoded master programming reacts extremely aggressively to defend its hibernating charges. These tomb worlds are the ones that have activated the most rapidly during the current awakening of the Necrons and are now hives of activity for the undying race. As their automated systems delve ever deeper into their existing archives of data and storehouses of units and weapons, the tomb worlds whose areas of influence have been invaded by the younger races are gearing up to begin what will eventually become a full-scale retaliatory action against the Imperium of Man and any other organized force that stands in the Necrons' way. This is a programmed behavior pattern that Imperial savants have dubbed the Harvest. When it comes to pass, it will be a genocidal-level event on a par with the war in heaven against the Old Ones millions of Terran years ago. The Khitan, or Necron, star gods, known in the Aeldari lexicon as the Ingir, are said to be the oldest intelligent beings in existence in the Milky Way galaxy. It is said that they were created at the very beginning of the universe, spawned from swirling gases and enormous amounts of energy, and as such are etheric creatures by nature. In their natural form, they are vast beings and spread themselves over the surface of a star, absorbing its solar energy to feed themselves. After a time, they learn to use diaphanous wings to travel to other stars to continue their consumption when their host star died. The matter around them was so insignificant that it did not register on their voracious appetite. They are only able to interact with the physical world thanks to the technology of the Necrontyr, which transferred their consciousnesses into bodies made of the living metal called Necrodermis. The C'tan used the hatred of the Necrontyr towards the ancient species called the Old Ones to help them gather the more appetizing energy of living beings that they came to crave. It was the C'tan who designed the process of biotransference for the Necrontyr, transferring their protégés' consciousnesses into undying mechanical bodies composed of Necrodermis. However, the biotransference process also transformed the Necrontyr into the Necrons, soulless beings who have difficulty taking pleasure in anything and who can never truly enjoy their immortality. After the end of the war in heaven against their ancient foes, the Old Ones, the Necrons, led by the silent King Sarek, successfully rebelled against their C'tan star gods. Those C'tan who survived the revolt were broken into fragments known as C'tan shards that were more easily contained and imprisoned within arcane Necron devices known as Tesseract Labyrinths. At present, since the Necrons' Great Awakening began in the mid-41 St. Millennium, these Chiton shards are deployed when needed as the Necron Dynasty's greatest weapons on the battlefield. However, there always exists the possibility that the imprisoned Chiton will escape their captors. Then they will wreak a terrible vengeance upon their captors and the innocent alike. A Chiton shard is all that remains of the once mighty star gods of Necron antiquity. They are now only echoes of their former selves, splinters of energy that survived their Necron servants' ancient betrayal and were enslaved in turn. Most now languish in unbreakable servitude to their former vassals, utterly incapable of acting without commission. Should a Chiton shard rebel or a fault develop in its control relays, then fail-safe mechanisms automatically activate, whisking the creature back to its tomb, there to languish for long Terran centuries, until times are dire enough that the Necrons must call upon its services again. Even with these precautions, the Necrons are wary of employing Chiton shards in battle. Though the chance of escape is remote, the possibility remains, so the day must be dark indeed for the Necron cause before the Tesseract Labyrinths are opened and the Chiton unleashed upon the galaxy once again. Even now, in their reduced and wholly fettered state, Chiton shards are beings of near unlimited power. They can manifest energy blasts, control the minds of lesser beings, manipulate the flow of time, and banish foes to alternate dimensions. Indeed, a Chiton shard's abilities are limited only by two things: its imagination, which is immense, and glimmering memories of the being from which it was severed. Whilst no individual Chiton shard has full recall of the omnipotent being it once was, each carries the personality and hubris of that vaster and more puissant being. Though a Chiton shard has the power to reduce a tank to molten slag with but a gesture, it might simply not occur to it to do so, as its Gestalt primogenitor would have tackled the situation through other means, such as by devolving the crew into primordial ooze, or deceiving them into attacking their own allies. The only hope of defeating a Chiton shard is to breach its Necrodermis shell, the living metal form that cages its energetic essence. If the Necrodermis is compromised, the Chiton shard explodes in a pulse of blinding energy, its being scattered to the galactic solar winds. Whilst it is true that many Chiton shards are now indentured to Necron service, this by no means accounts for the entire pantheon of Chiton. Rumors of Chiton-like beings can be found across the galaxy, though many are merely entities that exhibit inexplicable reality-warping powers. Indeed, any such being, whether warp-spawned demon, energy-based life form, or an alien with advanced technology, can be mistaken for a Chiton if the observer is primitive, credulous, or simply ill-informed enough. This discrepant information causes great confusion concerning the exact number and nature of the surviving Chiton, even among the Eldari. Records held in the Black Library contradict those maintained on Ulthwé, which are again at odds with the archives held on Alaitok. There might be 4 Chiton at present in the galaxy, 4,000 or any number in between. However, all Eldari agree that the splinters of knowledge held by the Imperium of Man are so flawed and confused that they, if anything, move further from the truth with each fresh discovery made. Any who go looking for proof of a Chiton's existence can easily uncover it, but this speaks more to the mindset of the searcher than it does to any value of the evidence. Transcendent Chiton are the most dangerous of their kind amongst the Chiton shards. Each is an aggregation of anywhere between 12 and 100 lesser Chiton shards, and its power far surpasses the sum of its parts. Those few that are chained to Necron service are not contained by Tesseract Labyrinths, but by energy shackles designed eons ago by the legendary Necron artificer Svarog. Such devices are unstable, making the deployment of a transcendent Chiton without the device known as a Tesseract Vault to contain it something of a risk, only undertaken in times of direst need. For this reason, when contained within a Tesseract Vault, A transcendent chiton is also kept within a special energy shield generated by a robotic Necron construct known as a Canoptek Sentinel. Canoptek Sentinels are used to control the raw elemental energies of a transcendent chiton. The Sentinel draws from the transcendent chiton's own power to generate a force shield strong enough to keep the chiton shackled to the mechanisms of the Tesseract Vault. Necrodermis is the Xenos material created millions of years ago by the Necrontyr species that is often described as living metal. The name literally means corpse skin, from Greek nekros and dermis, or dermis. It was originally used by the Necrontyr to construct their massive sublight starships that explored and settled the Milky Way galaxy millions of years ago. It was later adapted to create the robotic bodies possessed by the Citan and inhabited by the Necrontyr after they agreed to have their consciousnesses transferred from their short-lived organic forms. This process transformed the Necrontyr into the undying Necrons. Necrodermis is a material of unknown origin and chemical or molecular structure that possesses the extraordinary ability to regenerate almost all damage instantaneously, flowing back together as if it were a liquid while closing bullet holes, mending gashes and tears, or even reattaching severed pieces with little delay. The material is also adaptive in some unknown fashion and can learn to repair itself given enough time from nearly any form of damage, even a blast powerful enough to reduce it to its constituent molecules or atoms. In addition to the bodies of the Citan and the Necrons themselves, all Necron vehicles and starships are made from Necrodermis, including monoliths and Gauss pylons. The Imperium's Khitan phase weapons are also crafted from Necrodermis. It should be noted that Necrodermis is not an alloy of other metals, but a fundamentally new material created by the Necrontyr. Necrodermis is unbelievably resilient and can absorb incredible amounts of damage and then reform all tears or punctures over a period of time.